coffee for the speaker. So good morning. So today we are going to speak about the law of love. If you were not here before, if you're coming for the first time, anyone here for the first time? Yeah, okay, welcome. A few weeks ago, we did the first part of this lecture, and we talk about the general presence of love in our lives. We look into the ways in which Jesus has been loving us across the times. And also we talk a little bit, we touch very briefly on relationships as a divine place where we practice and develop love. Because love, as we have seen before, is something that can be learned. So that's one of the purposes of our existence, is to learn to love. Today, I had initially thought, well, for the second part, I'm going to talk about self-love and love for the enemies. Then I thought it was too much. We are struggling to love our friends. We are not doing a very good job with that. And so if you're in Facebook and if you're Brazilian, you probably lost a few friends over the course of the presidential election, because we have a difficult time loving when people are different than us. And love entails respect, and we are doing very poorly on that based on what I see on Facebook. So I thought there was too much to stretch for love the enemy. So let's focus today on loving ourselves.
Let's do part 3.
All right, so and I'm going to start. This is the introduction, and I try to learn with Luis Lima.
Yeah, look here.
And let's see how that works. So, and I use this lecture to practice for a professional lecture that I want to put a PowerPoint like this. So we're going to go over the introduction. Then we're going to explore the idea of dignity and self-worth. Dignity first, then self-love. We're going to look at the life of Peter, the disciple, as an example of someone who was extremely human and embraced his humanity to become the apostle that he became. And then we're going to talk a little bit about us. Where do we fit? How do we go about the things that we're going to listen and think about today? So I pulled that from the internet. I tried to find some data that would be a little bit more recent, but actually there's a very strong data from that time, right? So they tell us that major depressive disorder affects approximately 14.8 million American adults, or about 6.7% of the population age 18 or older in a given year. So this is 2005. I cannot imagine what the numbers are today. So we live a huge problem in our society related with depression. And when we look at self-esteem, right? Self-esteem has 2 components. One of them is self-worth, right? So are you worthy? What's your worth, right? And the other one is competency. So do you feel competent at your work? Do you feel competent as a parent? Are you competent as a friend? Are you competent in your relationships with your parents, with your significant others? So the sense of how competent we feel in life and also self-worth, these 2 aspects, they are part of what we call self-esteem. And so why I'm talking about depression and self-esteem, because there is a correlation between these 2. So clinical depression, when you look at clinical depression, there are 4 aspects that we can, and this is, I think, a didactic and simple explanation, right? So I'm sure that Sherry could add some points to it and some complexity to it. But in clinical depression, there are the issues of emotions, There are physical aspects, there are behavioral aspects, but also there are the types of thoughts that we can have, the ways that we think and the ways that we perceive ourselves. So, for example, we can have feelings type of thinkings, distorted thinkings about ourselves, distorted thinkings about reality. So there is something in psychology that called negative triad. Okay, so with negative triad, what it means is your thinking is distorted. Your perception of yourself, right? So your sense of worth, your perception of the world is bad, there is no hope for this world. So usually people who are depressed, there's a correlation with low self-esteem, meaning distorted thinking, the type of thinking that you have about yourself, that you have about the world out there, and that you have of the future. So lack of hope in the future, lack of hope in humanity. The world is a bad place. The world is just a negative environment. So people who are usually pessimistic and have this outlook of the world, but also this very low perception of the self, this has a strong correlation with the experience of depression. So it's worth it to pause for a second and to think, maybe we are not depressed. Maybe we are. Where do we fit in that, right? We're going to focus primarily on the perception of the self. How do we see ourselves? How do we perceive ourselves? What's our worth, right? And you can say, well, I'm awesome. Really? Truly? Deep inside? I'll tell you that people who feel truly awesome and truly in line with God, they don't usually go around saying, I'm awesome. They don't. Think about all the people who we see and perceive as leading of the world in terms of, higher consciences. They are very, very quiet about any of their qualities. There's no announcement of the self because there's no need, right? So we all have issues with our sense of worth. And this is where I think dignity plays a role, because dignity, as defined in the dictionary, is the state or quality of being worthy of honor and respect. Being worthy of honor and respect. And so this is an important step in loving oneself. So when we recognize ourselves as this, right? Who are you? I am a child of God. So spirituality, religion in general are venues that help us to connect with our true nature. Our true nature is a divine nature. Before we are Suzana, Abigail, Sandra, Angie, right? We are in essence a child of God. So we just came from a weekend of medical research, an incredible seminar conference where research is showing us over and over and over the role of spirituality in well-being. And the primary thing that spirituality does and religion does is to provide a sense of purpose, is to provide a sense of worth by telling you that you are a divine being in essence. Now, we understand that cognitively, but we don't feel that on a day-to-day, right? On a moment-to-moment basis. Sometimes if we stop and if we do a prayer, we might be invaded by that feeling of the divinity in us, within us. But a lot of times in the middle of our daily lives, we get lost. We lose that connection. The wireless spot goes away and we disconnect. Where's my connection, right? Very much like that. But this is truly who we are. And I think that spiritualism, per se, it's instrumental in reminding us in every possible aspect of who we truly are, and help us to have this sense of dignity and worth. There are, in the gospel, right, several characters, if not all of them, they're just like us, that share this very same feeling that we all share from time to time in our daily lives. So here is Mary of Magdalene, right? And in the book, Good News, there is a description about her life and her encounter with Jesus. And Humberto de Campos, who is the author of this book, he will describe that she was someone who was very beautiful, very wealthy. She lived in a palace, right? She had the most expensive furniture, the most expensive rugs. She had everything. Plus, she had every single man available to her. But she suffered from this incredible emptiness and hunger and thirst for love. And when her servants tell her about Jesus, that he was someone who treated the ones who suffered differently, with dignity and with love, she was afraid to meet him. She hesitated. She was afraid of his judgment. She was afraid if he would even speak to her or notice her or talk to her. And the sentiments that are described in this chapter are: she felt rotten, she felt ashamed, she felt empty, she was a sinner, she was possessed, she was condemned. Those are very strong sentiments. But I think it's sentiments that from time to time we have them, right? We feel ashamed sometimes of who we are or where we are, of our mistakes, especially our repeated mistakes, or our inability to take a step forward, to overcome something that we know that deep inside we should be doing differently. We are often ashamed of what we consider to be our own humanity, our weaknesses. We are ashamed of our limitations. We do things that are extremely unloving. We compare ourselves with others, for example, not for the best, not to seek an inspiration, but as a way of putting us down. So we all have a little bit of those feelings. Now, like her, Peter also felt very inadequate in many times of his life. So in Luke chapter 5, there is the description of this passage when one day Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and the people were crowding him around to listen to the word of God. So Jesus saw on the water, the edge of the water, two boats. They were left by the fishermen who were washing their nets. And he got in one of the boats that belonged to Simon, and he asked Simon to push him away. He sat down and he thought that day from the boat where he was. When he finished speaking, he told to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." And Simon said, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I'll let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break, and they had to call for help. And so their partners came, and it took two boats to be able to carry all the fish. So when Simon Peter saw this, when he realized what had just happened, he fell at Jesus' knees, and he said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." So when when Peter realized the grandiosity of Jesus and who he was, he felt unworthy of Jesus' presence, of Jesus' attention, of Jesus' love for him. So he too had this type of feeling. And then we can go to Zacchaeus, right? Zacchaeus, in the description of the gospel, he was a very short man in stature. But he was also a very short man morally. He was a tax collector, and he became very wealthy by taking advantage of his position. And so he was very wealthy, but he lived with his inner demons, which were the voices of all the people who he had hurt and who were constantly calling on his conscience for reparation. And he was so short and he was so aware of his conditions that when he hears about Jesus, he's curious about Jesus. But he's unable to look at Jesus, to look at love, eye on eye, face to face. And so he climbs the tree, so he can be above the crowd and not seen, because he too did not feel that he was worthy. And he lacked the dignity for himself, and he didn't feel that he was worthy to meet Jesus. So he felt short and he felt unworthy. Now, the Spirit Dias da Cruz in the book Pills of Love, he says that dignity is a leverage that provides the creature courage and strength to move towards the Creator. So first step in self-love is to connect with the sense that no matter where we are in our journey, in our level of consciousness and awareness, we are worthy. This sense of dignity helps us, gives us the strength. It becomes fuel. It helps us to stand up every day and say, yes, I'm worthy, and I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep moving forward. So it becomes this, it gives this impulse to the soul. So especially in the moments where we feel like truly weakened by our limitations and unable to take a step forward, the moments where perhaps we lose all the hope in ourselves, this is the moment where dignity becomes a powerful tool to help us to move on. Okay, so let's talk about self-love. Self-love requires meditation and self-analysis, right? So we need to seek to love ourselves by knowing ourselves, by understanding where we are. That's the first part. And it's defined by self-acceptance and self-respect, which is love with worth, with a sense of worth. So self-acceptance. Self-acceptance means that we are going to analyze ourselves. We're going to look inside, and we're going to find out that we have beautiful things and not so beautiful things, and we're going to embrace all of them. And self-respect, and we're going to respect where we are in our evolution. It seems very simple, but it's very difficult to do. We're extremely harsh on ourselves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. All right, so I put this little thing together that I hope it makes sense to talk a little bit about self-love. And this is based on the work of Joana de Angelis, the spirit Joana de Angelis, in the book Mining of Love. So self-love entails two things, and here's just one side of it. The other side is on the other slide. Two things: awareness of our mistakes and awareness of our potentialities. That's self-love. So it's not only that we are going to see and embrace our mistakes, but also our light, because we are light and our light is already shining. But on the side of the mistakes, we have two paths that we can take. We can become aware of them, or we can choose to deny them. We can choose to continue to be blind to the darkness within ourselves, and the problem is not mine, it's not me, it's the world out there, it's my husband, it's my wife, it's my parents, my children, it's the government, but never me. That's a path, and then you will continue to live in your old patterns and in unconsciousness, which is described in the gospel many times. When you see the reference, this person was asleep, that person was asleep, the asleep in the gospel meaning unconsciousness, unawareness. So we will be on that black side over there. Now we can become aware of our mistakes, and then we can follow the path of self-love or a path of self-hate, perhaps. So if we find ourselves committing a mistake and we are not connected to the sense of dignity and worth, right? So we feel unworthy and we lack dignity. Then we go through a path of guilt and punishment. So I made a mistake, I'm guilty, I should be punished. And then we keep repeating, we keep revisiting the mistakes, and we get stuck. We stop in stillness. We don't move forward. We don't progress. We don't grow. Or we can say to ourselves, I committed this mistake, or I have this limitation, or I have this frailty within myself, right? But I am worthy. I am a child of God, and I am human. And we need to stop to think about what is to be human, if not to have this paradoxical life of light and darkness, of contrast. It is precisely the contrast, the paradox, that will help us to move forward and to grow. So the path of healing and self-love is a path of acceptance, because the first thing, the most loving thing that we can do for ourselves is to embrace our own humanity with compassion. With compassion. I am today more than ever acutely aware of how the rigidity in which I treat the world out there, the people out there, is a reflection of the rigidity in which I treat myself on a daily basis. I am acutely aware of that. And I have been working every day to the highest level of consciousness that I can in not being so rigid anymore. First with me. And I'll share a little bit of this experience at the end when we get to the us part, so that each one of you can think about how are you going to take a step forward in loving yourselves when you leave here today. So when you take the path of self-love, then you realize your mistakes without losing the sense of value, of worthiness as a child of God, and you're going to treat yourself with love and respect, and you're going to take a mature approach. Instead of crucifying yourself and be stuck in guilt, you're going to take responsibility, you're going to amend, and you're going to grow. Without losing your peace, because you are embracing the human that you are. This is a path of humbleness. When we beat ourselves up over our mistakes, this is a path of pride, of not understanding that being human is being prone to mistakes and learning from your mistakes. But also self-love requires the recognition of our virtues, of our light, and the God within us. So it's not only about looking at our failures, our mistakes, our shortcomings, but it's also about recognizing our achievements, our accomplishments, and having what we call a positive pride about your growth. So if you are unaware of the light within you, you live in a condition of scarcity. And we have talked very much about this here in many other talks. Because you're disconnected from your inner source, from your true nature. But if you are aware of the light of God within, then you're going to develop more and more this state of abundance, and you're going to take your achievements as a stimulus. Your achievements become a source of hope and put you to work and make you take a step forward. If I have accomplished this, that means I can accomplish now that. And you use that as a stimulus to continue to grow. So self-love is the ability to embrace ourselves as a whole, making our limitations as stepping to our transformation. We don't push away our darkness. We embrace it. We learn from it. It becomes a step towards our evolution. And let's look then to the Apostle Peter. Because much is said about Paul, right? It seems like every other Sunday he's here in the room with us. Everybody loves Paul, right? But how about Peter? So Peter was an extremely, extremely humane apostle. And so what we're going to do now for the next 5 minutes is we're going to look into Peter's humanity by going back to a few passages on the gospel that illustrate the human in the apostle. And by, when I say the human, the light and the darkness. So we're going to visit now the paradox called Peter. So this passage here is a passage that you find in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 14 that speaks about Peter's little faith. So Peter answered to Jesus, "Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you on the water." Right? So he sees Jesus walking over the water. And Jesus says, "Come on." So Peter got down out of the boat, starting walking on the water, and came to Jesus. So first thing, he's walking over the water. So he's walking over life challenges. We can interpret that way. We all invited to walk over waters, to take the challenges of our personal lives. And he's walking, and his eyes are in Jesus' eyes, who is the source of life and who is the source of power. And he is in tune with the superior purposes of life as he starts to walk, looking Jesus into his eyes. But then what happens? He noticed a strong wind. And he's taken by this very human, natural feeling called fear. And what happens when he feels fear? He drowns, right? Fear drowns us in life. When we are unable to manage it, we all going to have it. He had it. The issue is not to feel fear or not. The issue is when you let fear take over you, because fear becomes stronger than faith. Because fear becomes stronger. Now, fear is a normal feeling and calls for faith. Faith is what? Is the natural surrender to this divine wisdom and control. So right now, in times of politics, there is a tremendous amount of fear spread. And the fear, when not counteracted by faith, causes this internal and social, individual and social disorganization, despair. Because we humans are trying to control a process that is in God's hands. So fear, so he drowns. And as he began to sink, he shouted, "Lord, save me." And then Jesus reached out with his hands, caught him, and asked him, "You who have so little faith, why did you doubt?" The question is for you, for all of us, you who have so little faith, why do you doubt? Right? So he was a man who had fears. But he was also a man of light. So in this particular passage, which is in Matthew 16, Jesus comes to the region of Caesarea Philippi and asks his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they reply, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and other Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he turns to Peter and says, but how about you, he asks, who do you say I am? And he's going to say, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus is going to say to him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father who is in heaven. In other words, Peter, at that moment, he was so attuned to the higher spirits that he became a medium of light. He answered, inspired by the higher spirits who were next to him, and he is able to recognize in that moment what Christ truly represented to humanity. In that moment, he is light. So much so that right after, Jesus is going to tell him what? I tell you, Peter, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hate will not overcome it. So not only he was a medium of light, but Jesus recognized his essence and told him that over him, he would build his church, his kingdom, right? Over that rock, the rock that he was, the rock that he represented, the solid foundation for the kingdom of God to be built upon. But again, right after this dialogue, Jesus now is going to tell the disciples that his moment, the moment of the testimony, of the sacrifice for humanity was coming. And he's going to say that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day he would be raised to life. What did Peter say at that time? He said, never, Lord. This shall never happen to you. I think we would say the same. Right? Lord, no, let me protect you, right? What can we do to save you? Why? Because he, although he was already living with Jesus, he had not understood yet what it would take to construct the kingdom of heaven, the level of sacrifice and renunciation to the things of the world, and what true life really meant. Nor do we, right? We heard rumors of what that means. But we're still working on developing the awareness. It's natural. We're children. It takes time. It takes time. He too could not understand. So Jesus at that time going to say what? Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Just like we do every day. We set our mind on human things. This sequence in the gospel is one after the other. So in one moment, Jesus is telling Peter, you are a medium of heaven. You are the light. You are the rock. And on the other moment, he's telling Jesus, you are Satan. You are the stumbling block to me. Is there anything more human than this? Isn't that what we live day to day? There are moments that we are more attuned with the higher purposes of life. There are moments where we are acting completely oblivious. We are fully immersed in the illusions of this life, just like him. This is to be human. And this is okay. And this is divine because God created us knowing that the path would be that our humanity would entail light and darkness. And that at the same time that we can be so lost, still, regardless, no matter what, we are in essence light, and over the rock that each one of us is, the kingdom of heaven will be built. And each one of you and each one of us is that little rock in which the kingdom of heaven will be founded. This comprehension of our humanity, the more we can interject this awareness into our beings, the more we will love ourselves, and the more power we'll have to love our fellow human being. I'm going to skip this one because of the time, but there was Peter cutting the ear of the soldier when they come to arrest Jesus. This picture here that I found on the internet is called the Simon Peter paradox, right? So that's the final moment before he changes. He starts to do a more effective change in his life. So what is this picture about? This picture is about the denial, right? He's the rooster, right? And it's the moment that he denies Christ 3 times. After he had told Christ just previously 3 times how much he loved him. And this is again us. We come here, whether it's in the podium, whether it's in our prayers, whether it's in our study groups, and we shout from the depths of our hearts how much we love Jesus Christ. How much we love the good spirits, how much we wish the kingdom of heaven. And yet, we will, because it's just part of our learning, we will deny Christ, not 3 times, hundreds of times in the course of our lives. But in that moment, he did not forget what Jesus told him. Upon this rock I will build my church. Because no matter how many times he denied Christ, he was the rock. And so he took these sentiment, and André Moreira in the book Self-Love and Other Potentialities of the Soul, he will say, Peter gradually learned to reconcile the opposites in his innermost, loving his shadow and recognizing his light. His conversion was so deep that it has been written that even his dark side healed the sick and the possessed. He became a living letter of Christ's love by embracing himself and by accepting his limitations, conflicts, and pains without letting them paralyze him. On the contrary, he built his fortitude from his weaknesses. And this is truly what we are invited to do. I was going to, there's nothing on this slide purposefully, because it's for each one of you to think about in which ways you were being unloving with yourself. And I had a personal experience to share, but I'm not going to because I want to give you a little bit of time to talk. I will do it in another lecture. But let me just finish with this poem by Jung, which you have just a little piece over there. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you. Are you there? I have returned. I'm here again. I have shaken the dust of all the lands from my feet, and I have come to you. I am with you. After long years of long wandering, I have come to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noise of life and the world? But one thing, my soul, you must know. The one thing I have learned is that one must live this life. Do you still know me? How long the separation lasted? Everything has become so different. And how did I find you? How strange my journey was. What words should I use to tell you on what twisted paths a good star has guided me to you? Give me your hand, my almost forgotten soul. How warm the joy at seeing you again, you long disavowed soul. Life has led me back to you. Let us thank the life I have lived for all the happy and all the sad hours, for every joy, for every sadness. My soul, my journey should continue with you. I will wander with you and ascend to my solitude. So hold on to the hands of your soul. Give it a warm embrace, and let's move on. Thank you. All right, guys.